He kicked her, a federal officer, in a crowded airport, in broad daylight, and she didn't go down. That one moment, that single refusal to fall, unraveled 3 years of carefully buried crime, exposed a network reaching higher than anyone in that terminal could have imagined, and put a woman in handcuffs for standing exactly where she had every legal right to stand. Her phone kept ringing. Her brother was dying in a Houston hospital, and the men who needed her gone had already deleted the evidence, silenced the witnesses, and written the ending. They forgot one thing: she hadn't signed it yet. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, 3:47 in the afternoon. The terminal smelled like coffee and recycled air, and the exhaustion of people who had been waiting too long for things that mattered. Zara Okafor stood in the medical priority lane and did not move. She was 29 years old, 5'6", a pediatric resident who had not slept more than 4 consecutive hours in 11 days. She was wearing dark slacks and a cream blouse and the small gold earrings her mother had given her the morning she matched into residency. She had her boarding pass in her left hand and her medical priority authorization in her right, and her phone in her coat pocket buzzing against her ribs like a second heartbeat. Houston was calling. She did not answer. Not yet. Because if she answered and heard her mother's voice, she would not be able to do the next thing she needed to do, which was stand here, stay calm, get on that plane. Darius was 22 years old, and he had been living with a congenital heart defect since he was 4. Most of the time he was fine. Most of the time he was the loudest person in any room, and the one who ate the last piece of cornbread without asking, and the one who called Zara at midnight just to argue about which hoppist drama was the most medically inaccurate, most of the time. But 3 days ago his cardiologist in Houston had called with the kind of voice doctors used when they had already rehearsed what they were going to say. Aortic valve. Deteriorating faster, projected. Surgery scheduled for tomorrow morning. 6 a.m., they needed Zara there. Not because the surgery required her, because Darius had asked for her. Because their mother Eleanor was already there, and she was strong in the way women who have buried husbands and raised children alone were strong. But Eleanor was not a doctor, and when the surgical team used words like procedural risk and intraoperative variables and quality of life outcomes post-repair, Eleanor needed someone besides her who could translate fear into information. Was a job. Had always been Zara's job, so she was here. Lane 4, medical priority. Authorization form signed by her attending physician and the hospital's patient liaison and notarized the same morning. Every box checked, every requirement met. Flight at 2247 to Houston. Boarding at 4:52. Departure at 5:10. She had exactly 63 minutes. She did not 63 minutes. She needed 12. 12 minutes to clear security, walk to gate B14 and sit down. She had checked the airport map twice. She had given herself buffer. She had planned this the way she planned everything. Carefully, precisely, without room for error. What she had not planned for was Dale Briggs. Officer Dale Briggs was 46 years old, and he had worked to airport security at Hartsfield-Jackson for 9 years. Yes, in those 9 years, he had one thing above everything else. People moved when he told them to move, not because they wanted to, because he had a badge and a voice that carried, and because most people, when confronted with authority in a uniform, defaulted to compliance the way plants defaulted to sunlight. It was not complicated. It had never been complicated. He was standing near the priority lane entrance at 3:44 when his earpiece clicked. Captain Vance, clear the lane. The voice was even, unhurried. The voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed without explanation. Package is moving. 2 minutes. Briggs looked at the priority lane. There was a woman standing in it. Navy coat, medical paperwork in her hand. She was looking at her boarding pass, and then at the departure board, and then at her phone. She was not causing trouble. She was not being loud. She was just standing there the way people with valid reasons stood in lines they had every right to be in. Briggs started walking toward her. He was not thinking about why the lane needed to be cleared. He was not thinking about what package meant, or who had sent the order, or why it had come through a private channel rather than the standard radio frequency. He was not thinking about the woman's paperwork, or what her morning had looked like before she arrived here, or wherever chair she was trying to go. He was thinking about the fact that he had been given an instruction, and he was going to follow it. Zara saw him coming. She noticed the way his eyes moved past her before they landed on her. like he was checking something behind her first, like she was a problem he had been sent to solve rather than a person he was approaching. She told herself she was reading into it. She told herself she was tired and anxious, and her brain was doing the thing brains did when they had been running on cortisol and vending machine coffee for 72 hours. She held up her medical priority authorization before he reached her. "Sir, I have a priority pass. My brother is scheduled for cardiac surgery tomorrow morning. I'm on flight 22 for 7. Briggs stopped in front of her. He looked at the form, then at her, then past her again, toward the service corridor entrance behind her. "You need to step out of the lane, ma'am." Zara kept her voice even. "I have documentation. This lane is designated for medical priority travelers. I qualify. Step out of the lane." "Sir." Still even. Still 2 years old. "He has a congenital aortic valve defect. His surgery is at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I need to be on this plane." Briggs, "Step closer." And then he shoved her. Not a tap, not a redirect. Both hands, shoulder and chest. Hard enough that the authorization form flew out of her right hand and skittered across the polished floor. The terminal noise seemed to drop. Not silence. The airport was never silent. But something shifted, the way sound shifted when something had happened that people were not expecting and did not yet have language for. Zara did not fall. This was the part that surprised him. She could see it on his face, the small recalibration. The fractional pause of a man whose plan had assumed an outcome that was not occurring. Because most people would have stumbled. Most people would have gone sideways and grabbed for something and spent the next few seconds trying to recover their balance and their composure at the same time. But Zara had been training with Coach Samuel E. Z since she was 17 years old. Not to fight. She needed to be clear about that. Even later, when it mattered what words she used and how she used them. She had not trained to fight. She had trained to understand how her body moved under pressure, how to breathe when the instinct was to stop breathing, how to keep her feet when everything else was trying to take them out from under her. Coach Eads had built that into her over 12 years of early mornings and bruised knuckles and a gym that smelled like rubber mats and effort. He had never once said the word dangerous. He said controlled. He said present. He said you do not fight because you want to. You train because the body needs to know what to do before the mind has time to panic. So when Briggs shoved her, her body responded before her mind did. Weight dropped, center of gravity lowered, feet widened automatically. The force of his push moved through her and dissipated into the floor instead of toppling her. She slid back maybe 4 inches. That was all. And then Briggs's face changed. The surprise curdled into something harder. Not quite anger. Something seemed closer to the feeling of a man who had expected a door to open and found it locked and had decided the door was the problem. He came at her again, both hands reaching, going for her arms, going to grab and pull and force her where he needed her to go. Zara saw his hands coming. She stepped back, half a step. Her right arm came up, and she used a basic clinch redirect, the kind of movement that existed to interrupt forward momentum without causing harm. She was not trying to take him down. She was creating 18 inches of space between his hands and her body. It worked. Except that Briggs, moving with the full commitment of a man who had not expected resistance, could not stop himself. His weight was already forward. His feet had not accounted for her, not being where he expected her to be. He went down, hard, right knee on the polished terminal floor. Then his hands came out to catch himself, and one wrist caught wrong, and he made a sound that was half pain and half something else. So something that understood it, had an audience, and was adjusting accordingly. Zara stepped back immediately. Both hands up, palms open, everything visible. "I am not resisting." Her voice shook. She could not make it not shake, but every word was clear. "He shoved me first. I am not resisting." People were watching. They had been watching since the shove, but now they were really watching. Because now there was a woman with her hands up and an officer on the floor, and the two images did not fit together the way people expected airport security images to fit. Phones were Azazing. One phone in particular. Jerome Aldridge was 44 years old, and he had been sitting in gate area B11 for 2 hours, waiting for a flight to Dallas where his sister lived, and where he had not visited it in 8 months because work had kept him in Atlanta, and guilt had kept him making promises he kept rescheduling. He was a software engineer. He noticed things, patterns. The difference between what a system was supposed to do and what it was actually doing. He had noticed the lane. Specifically, he had noticed that the medical priority lane had been empty for 14 minutes despite the normal flow of passengers through the terminal. That was not an accident. Lanes did not stay empty by themselves. Lanes stayed empty when someone made them empty. And then he had noticed Briggs walking toward the woman with the paperwork. The angle of approach, the hand at the earpiece, the eyes that went past her before they went to her. Jerome had started looking for Briggs reached. He had the shove on video. He had Briggs's hands. He had Zara not falling. He had Briggs coming forward again. He had the clinch redirect. He had the fall. He had Zara's hands going up and her voice saying, "I am not resisting," while her authorization form lay on the floor 6 feet away from her like something that had been decided to not matter. He had everything. He kept recording, and he kept recording while a supervisor in a gray uniform appeared at his elbow 30 seconds later with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been watching for exactly this. "Sir, I'm going to need you to put that down." Jerome kept his phone up. "I'm a passenger. I'm in a public area. This is a restricted security zone. Recording is prohibited under federal aviation security. I know the regulation." Jerome looked at the supervisor without lowering the phone. "I also know where the posted notices are required to be. There are no notices in this section." The supervisor's expression did not change. "Sir, I need that device." Jerome looked at the departure board. His flight was still 40 minutes out. He looked at Zara, who was being guided toward a gray door by 2 officers, while a third picked up her authorization form from the floor and sealed it into a plastic evidence bag. He had approximately 20 seconds. He opened his Bluetooth without looking down. His thumb found the share function from muscle memory. The file was all selected. He sent it to the tablet of the woman sitting 3 seats to his left, Mrs. Bertha Coleman, 68 years old, silver hair, reading a magazine with the focused patience of someone who had been in airports many times and had learned to simply be present in them. She looked up when Jerome leaned slightly toward her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, without turning his head fully toward her. "I just sent something to your tablet, a video. Please don't delete it." Bertha Coleman looked at him. Then she looked at the scene unfolding near lane 4. Then she looked back at him over her reading glasses, with the expression of a woman who had lived 68 years and knew the difference between a request and a need. "I won't," she said, and went back to her magazine. The supervisor took Jerome's phone 40 seconds later and walked toward a staff door without looking back. Jerome sat down. He put his hands on his knees, and he breathed, and he looked at the gray door that had just closed behind Zara, and he thought about the footage on Bertha Coleman's tablet, and he thought about what it meant that the supervisor had appeared so quickly, and he thought about the lane that had been empty for 14 minutes before any of this began. Systems failed in patterns. He had been a software engineer long enough to know that. When something went wrong in a complex system, it rarely went wrong in one place. It went wrong in the places that had been arranged to accommodate the going wrong. He sat still as he thought about that, and across the terminal, 40 feet away in the opposite direction, a man in a dark airport jacket was pulling a silver-handled suitcase through the service corridor without stopping, without scanning, without any of the things that were supposed to happen at a security checkpoint in the busiest airport in the country. Nobody in the terminal was looking at him. They were all looking at where Zara had been, which was exactly the point. Nadia Webb had worked the overnight cleaning shift at Hartsfield for 11 years. She was 42 years old. She had raised 2 sons in this city on a salary that required careful mathematics every month. She had buried her husband in this city 6 years ago in a Navy suit he had only worn twice while she was married to him. She had paid rent late and on time, and sometimes in 2 installments when the timing did not cooperate, and she had never once asked the airport for anything beyond what her contract said she was owed. She knew this building the way people knew places they had inhabited for a long time without being noticed in them. Not the public face, not the flight boards and the restaurants and the right terminal windows that made travelers feel like they were somewhere significant. The other face. The service corridors with the chipped door frames and the cameras that covered some angles and not others. Employee break rooms where people said things they would never say in front of passengers. The maintenance schedules that most people never read. The loading zones. the access doors, and which key had been issued in 2021 and never collected back because nobody tracked cleaning staff equipment with the same attention they tracked everything else. She had been at corridor entrance 4 at 3:33 p.m. when she first noticed the lane empty. On a Tuesday afternoon, when the terminal was running at full volume, not incidentally empty, deliberately empty. She had been in this building long enough to know the difference. She noticed Briggs standing near the priority lane entrance with his hand at his earpiece. She noticed two other officers she had seen work with him before positioned at either end of the adjacent checkpoint area. She noticed Captain Roy Vance standing near the service corridor door in the particular posture of a man who was pretending to check something on his radio while actually watching a specific section of the terminal. She had seen this configuration before. Not every week, not even every month, but enough times in the past 9 months to have started counting. October, January, March, and now this. Each time the priority lane had been unusually clear. Each time Vance had been visible near the corridor entrance. Each time, when everyone was looking somewhere else, a suitcase had moved through the serve corridor without being processed. Different suitcase each time. Different jacket on the man carrying it. Same walk. The walk of a man who knew he would not be stopped. This time the suitcase was silver. Nadia watched it happen from 40 feet away while she changed a trash liner near the corridor entrance with the slow, unhurried movements of a woman doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing, and therefore completely unremarkable to everyone around her. She watched Briggs approach the woman in the navy coat. She watched him speak. She watched the woman hold up her paperwork and speak back with the composure of someone who has understood her own documentation and expected it to be sufficient. She watched Briggs shove her. She watched the woman not fall. And she watched Vance from the corridor entrance give a single nod to someone just inside the service door. The man with the silver suitcase moved through. No stop. No scan. Vance's hand dropped to his radio. Nadia kept changing the liner. She watched two officers guide the woman toward the gray door. She watched a third officer pick up the authorization form from the floor and seal it into an evidence bag. She watched the gray door close. She looked at the corridor entrance. The man with the silver suitcase was gone. She looked at Vance. He was looking at his radio with the expression of a man whose afternoon had gone according to plan. She pushed her cart toward the next station. She thought about the woman's face. Just for a second, just before the gray door closed. The face of someone who could not understand why was happening when everything she had done was correct. The paperwork was correct. The lane was correct. The reason was correct. And none of it had been sufficient. Nadia had worn that face before. A long time ago in a different building with different men in charge of a different situation. She had been 19 years old, and she had done everything correctly, and it had not been enough. And by the time she understood why it was already too late for the understanding to help, she did not let herself stand still and think about that. Standing still and thinking was not a thing she could afford to do in this corridor with Vance 20 feet away. She pushed her cart and she moved at exactly the pace she always moved, and she began very quietly to count. The room behind the gray door was cold. Metal table bolted to the floor, 2 plastic chairs. A camera in the upper corner with a red light that blinked with the steady indifference of systems that did not care what they were recording. The smell of disinfectants and something older underneath it. A fluorescent light that hummed at a frequency, just noticeable enough to make the room feel smaller than it was. Zara sat down without being told to. She kept her hands on the table, both of them, visible, flat. Because she knew what the official record would say if her hands were anywhere that could be described as anything other than completely and demonstrably non-threatening. She had not needed to be told this. She had understood it in the way that women who looked like her and moved through institutions like this understood things, not from paranoia, from experience, accumulated from years of being the only resident in the room who got asked twice to show her badge. From years of walking into waiting rooms and watching the calculation happen on faces before she had a chance to introduce herself. From years of being excellent at her job and understanding that excellence was not armor. The 2 officers, the younger one, stood near the door and had been avoiding her eyes since they brought her in. The older one sat across the table with an empty folder and a pen and the neutral professional expression of a man who had done this many times and had learned to perform detachment as a form of power. Zara spoke before either of them did. My name is Dr. Zara Okafor. My brother Darius Okafor is a patient at Houston Methodist Hospital. He is scheduled for aortic valve repair surgery at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. I am his designated medical decision-maker and the physician on his care team with the most complete knowledge of his history. I need to make a phone call to his surgical team. The older officer clicked his pen. Ma'am, you're being detained in connection with an assault on a law enforcement officer. Officer Briggs initiated physical contact. I did not. That's under review. A passenger was recording from before the incident began. That device is also under review. Her phone was in a clear evidence bag on the corner of the table. She could see the screen through the plastic. It lit up while she was watching it. Houston Methodist. The older officer reached over without looking at her and turned the bag face down. Something moved through Zara's chest. She recognized it. She had felt it before in pediatric emergencies when the thing she needed was not available and the clock was running and the only thing she could control was herself. It was not panic. It was something adjacent to panic that she had trained herself to route into focus rather than into reaction. She chose to handle the next thing. Under Georgia code and applicable federal statute, she said, and her voice was completely level. You are required to permit me to make one phone call within a reasonable time frame. The hospital calling right now represents a documented medical emergency involving a family member for whom I hold legal medical proxy. You cannot legally prevent me from responding to that contact. The younger officer near the door shifted his weight. The older one looked at the folder, which was still empty, which meant they had not yet written anything down because the conversation had not gone the way they had expected, and they were waiting to see which version of it they were going to need to record. We'll process the incident first, he said. How long will that take? However long it takes, ma'am. Zara looked at the camera in the corner. At the red light, she did not look at the phone. She looked at the camera and she thought about the fact that someone was watching to this feed or would watch it so later, and she wanted whoever that was to see this woman sitting with her hands flat on a table, being told that a medical emergency was less important than a form that had not yet been filled out. She thought about Darius, about the last time she had seen him 4 weeks ago when he had driven up from Houston because he said he was bored and wanted real food. He had eaten everything in her refrigerator and fallen asleep on her couch, watching basketball, and when he left, he had hugged her at the door for longer than usual. She had noticed. She had filed it away and told herself she would call that week. And then the week had gotten complicated the way weeks always got complicated, and she had not called. She breathed, in through the nose. 4 counts. Hold for 2. Out through the mouth. 4 counts. Coach Eze had taught her that at 17. Not just for the gyms. For the moments when what you needed most was a body that would cooperate with the situation you were in, even when everything in you was pulling toward somewhere else. She breathed, and she waited, and she did not look at the phone. Outside, the terminal continued. This was what struck people afterward when they tried to describe what it had been like to be there. How life had simply kept moving. Flights boarded. Announcements echoed. Families argued about who had remembered to charge the portable battery. Children pressed their faces to the departure windows and watched planes move across the tarmac like slow animals. The ordinary machinery of a place that processed 50,000 people a day and had no mechanism for pausing when something went wrong for one of them. Dale Briggs sat in a wheelchair near the security checkpoint. He had not asked for a wheelchair. The wheelchair had appeared within 90 seconds of his fall, along with a neck brace and 2 airport medical staff who had materialized with the efficiency of people who had been in position rather than people who had responded to an emergency. Briggs understood without being told what the wheelchair and the brace were for. He was wearing the brace correctly now and holding his shoulders in the careful posture of a man performing measured pain for a purpose. Roy Vance stood nearby with his hands clasped behind his back. Vance was 54 years old. He was the kind of man who had been described as calm so many times in his career that he had come to mistake calm for integrity. He was not a violent man. He did not think of himself as corrupt. He thought of himself as a practical man who had found 3 years ago a practical arrangement that worked for a small number of people and harmed no one he could see standing directly in front of him. He had not planned for a woman who didn't move. He looked at the corridor entrance where the silver suitcase had gone through. Then he looked at the gray door where the woman had been taken. Then he looked at Briggs in the wheelchair and thought, with the specific controlled thinking of a man who managed situations for a living, about the distance between where things currently were and where he needed them to end up. His radio clicked, a voice, low. Not Vance's voice, a different register entirely. Shorter, the voice of a man who spoke in instructions rather than conversations. Phone secured, Vance lifted the radio. Secured, cloud backup being checked. A pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds. Make sure it doesn't leave. Vance lowered the radio. He did not look around. Men in his position had learned early that looking around was the thing that made other people start looking too. 40 feet away, near the entrance to Service Corridor 4, Nadia Webb was pushing her cart past the access door. She had her eyes down. Her hands moved at their usual pace, the pace she had spent 11 years making automatic, so that it required no performance. The pace that made her invisible in this building, not because she was insignificant, but because she had understood a long time ago that invisibility in certain environments was not a diminishment. It was a strategy. She heard every word. She kept moving. She turned left at the next junction and stopped at the cleaning supply station and stood there with her hand on her cart for approximately 4 seconds. Then she reached into her pocket and looked at her phone. She pulled up a browser. She typed a name, Calvin Reed, attorney at law, Atlanta. She looked at the number. Then she put the phone back in her pocket and pushed her cart toward the next station and did not let her face change because her face was one of the few things in this building she still controlled completely. But she was already making a decision. She had not finished making it yet. There were still several hours between where she was and where that decision would take her. She was aware of that. She was aware of the cost of it and the risk of it and the 11 years of employment and the pension contributions and the son who texted her, "You good, Ma," and deserved to have a mother who was careful. She was aware of all of that, and she was aware of the woman in the navy coat whose phone had lit up with Houston Methodist while an officer turned it face down on a table without looking at her. She kept walking. She did not stop counting. At 4:07 p.m., the departure board updated. Flight 2247 to Houston, now boarding. Zara did not see it. She was sitting in the cold room with her hands flat on the table and the red light blinking above her and the folder across from her still mostly empty. The older officer had asked her to describe the incident twice now. She had described it as Dungwaba the Horbstar because it had happened the same way both times, and she was not going to begin describing things differently in order to give him a different version to write down. The younger officer near the door had stopped avoiding her eyes. He was looking at her now with an expression she recognized. Not sympathy, exactly. Something more uncomfortable than sympathy. The expression of a person who understood that what was happening in this room was not entirely right, but who had not yet decided what to do with that understanding. Her phone lit up again inside the evidence bag. Houston Methodist. The older officer did not reach for it this time. He looked at it. Then he looked at the folder. Then he looked at his pen. Zara watched him. "That is the surgical care team for my brother," she said. "When they call this many times, it is because they need a decision. I am the person makes that decision. Every minute I do not answer that call is a minute. The surgical team is operating without complete information." The older officer said nothing. "I understand that you have a job to do," she said. "I am asking you to understand that I also have one." The younger officer near the door opened his mouth and then closed it. The older officer picked up his pen. "Ma'am," he said, the statement. Zara looked at the camera in the corner, at the red light that had been blinking since they brought her in, at the empty folder that was going to contain whatever version of this afternoon these two men decided to put in it. She breathed. 4 counts. 2. 4. "My name is Dr. Zara Zokafor," she said again from the beginning. The way Coach East had taught her to go back to what she knew when she did not know what was coming next. "My brother Darius is 22 years old and his surgery is at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Officer Briggs initiated physical contact with me in a lane I had every legal right to be standing in. I did not strike him. I created distance. I raised my hands immediately. I said I was not resisting. There was a passenger recording from before the incident began. She said it clearly. She said it like a woman who intended for every word to be on record because every word was true. Outside the gate area near B11, Bertha Coleman had not moved from her seat. She had her magazine closed on her lap now. Her tablet was in her carry-on bag, zipped closed with the careful closure of a woman who understood she was holding something that needed to stay held. She had watched the gray door close. She had watched the supervisor carry Jerome's phone behind a staff door. She had watched the medical priority lane fill again with new passengers who moved through it without knowing what had happened to the woman who had been standing in it 20 minutes ago. Bertha Coleman was 68 years old, and she had been a school librarian for 27 years. And in those 27 years, she had watched children learn that the world did not always give things to the people who deserved them. And that sometimes the most important thing a person could do was hold on to something true, even when someone with more apparent authority was trying to take it from them. She settled her carry-on more firmly on her lap. She was not going anywhere. The gate agent announced final boarding for a flight to Memphis. 2 rows over a man fell asleep against the window. The terminal kept moving the way terminals moved, without pause, without acknowledgement of the gray door, or the authorization form in the evidence bag, or the phone in the cold room that kept lighting up with a name that nobody in that room would let her answer. And in the service corridor behind everything, the silver suitcase was already where Vance needed it to be. And the lane was already filling with new people who did not know they were standing in a place where something had just been buried. And Zara sat with her hands flat on the table and her spine straight and her voice steady, and she said what had happened. And she said it as many times as they asked her to say it, and she did not stop saying it, because the truth was the one thing in that room that no one had managed to put in an evidence bag. Not yet. Calvin arrived at Hartsfield, Texas at 5:40 in the evening. He was 57 years old, gray at the temples, a charcoal suit that had seen better decades but still held its shape the way good things held their shape when they had been built correctly from the start. A leather briefcase worn soft at the corners from 30 years of being carried into rooms where the outcome mattered. He did not run through the terminal. Men who ran in airports looked like men who had already lost control of the situation. Calvin walked the way he had learned to walk across 3 decades of civil rights law. Like he had been expected. Like the building had been waiting for him specifically and was going to have to deal with the consequences of that. Eleanor Okafor had called him at 4:02 in the afternoon. He had been in his office on Auburn Avenue finishing a brief when the phone rang, and a woman said, "This is Eleanor Okafor, James Okafor's wife." And Calvin had set down his pen before she finished the sentence because he remembered James Okafor, and he remembered the situations in 2006, and he remembered the particular quality of Eleanor's voice from those months, the voice of a woman holding herself together through sheer refusal to do otherwise, and the fact that she was using that voice again told him everything he needed to know before she said another word. She told him what she knew: Zara at the airport, the call that had not come, the phone that had gone quiet in a way that was not voicemail, Darius pre-op at Houston Methodist, Surgery 66 Sim, a daughter who was somewhere inside a federal security facility and not answering. When she finished, Calvin asked 2 questions. Which airport? What time did she go through security? Then he said, "Focus on Darius. I will find her," and he closed the brief he had been working on and picked up his coat. He found the family processing office on the lower level and gave his name to the clerk. The clerk looked at him the way clerks looked at people they had been told to slow down. "Mr. Reed, the situation is still under active review. We're not able to facilitate an attorney access until initial processing is complete. Under Georgia Code Section 17550. Calvin pleasantly, a detained individual has the right to consult with legal counsel without unreasonable delay. I have documentation of my retention by the family. I would like to see my client now." The clerk picked up a phone. Calvin stood and waited. He did not check his watch. He did not shift his weight. He had learned a long time ago that impatience was information you gave to people who would use it against you. So he gave them nothing. He stood and he waited, and he looked at the wall behind the clerk's desk with the patient attention of a man who had all the time in the world, which was not true. but which he understood was the only useful posture available to him in this particular moment. 11 minutes later, a younger officer led him down a hallway that smelled like floor wax and fluorescent light, and something institutional underneath both. Zara said, look it up when the door opened. She had been in the room for just over 2 hours. She had given a statement. She had answered questions. She had repeated her name and Darius's name, and the name of his hospital enough times that the words had begun to feel like objects she was carrying rather than things she was saying. She had not cried. She had made that decision early, not because crying was wrong. Because crying in this room with these men in this situation would enter the record in a way that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with how people interpreted women who cried under certain kinds of pressure. She had seen it happen to other women. She was not going to let it happen to her here. She looked at Calvin Reed and felt something shift in her chest. Not relief exactly, something more structural. The feeling of a load-bearing pink wall that had been holding everything up alone finally having something built beside it. Calvin sat down across from her. He opened his briefcase. He took out a legal pad. He looked at her with the direct, unhurried attention of a man who was not performing concern, but actually exercising it. 3 questions, he said. Then we talk about what comes next. Zara nodded. Did Officer Briggs make physical contact with you first? Yes. After he fell, did you move toward him? No. I stepped back and raised my hands. Before he approached you, where were his eyes? Zara paused. Not because she didn't know, because she had not been asked this before. Both officers who had questioned her had asked about her hands and her feet and her training background, and whether she had any prior incidents with law enforcement. Nobody had asked about his eyes. He looked past me, she said. Before he spoke to me, he was looking at something behind me, toward the service corridor entrances. Calvin popped that down without reacting. He looked past you first, he said. Not at you, not at first. He was checking something, or waiting for something. Then he looked at me and told me to step out of the lane. Calvin capped his pen. Okay, he said. Here he told her the charges. Assaults on a enforcement officer, resisting detainment, disorderly conduct in a restricted security zone. He told her what the airport's current evidentiary position was. An officer had been injured. 2 witnesses in the immediate vicinity had saying they saw a woman strike an officer. Briggs had been transported to the airport medical facility, where physicians had documented cervical strain. Then he told her what he knew that they did not know he knew. A man named Jerome Aldridge was recording before the incident began. Airport security took his phone. But Jerome called my office from a pay phone at 5:15 this evening. Calvin said this the way he said things that mattered. Without emphasis, just placement. He believes his recording was transferred before his device was confiscated. He is working on confirming what survived. Zara went very still. He believes, she said. He was not specific about the transfer method on the phone, but he was specific about what the recording shows. Calvin looked at her steadily. It shows Briggs making physical contact first. It shows your response. It shows you raising your hands and stepping back. Zara pressed her palms flat on the table, she breathed. Because if that was true, if that recording existed somewhere outside the airport's control, then this was not over in the way they had designed it to be over. There is something else, she said. Calvin waited. When Briggs had his hand at his earpiece, just before he reached me, she looked at the table. I heard something through the earpiece. A voice. Brief. It said clear the lane, and then something about a package. Calvin's pen stopped moving. You heard that clearly enough. I was close to him, and the terminal noise dropped for a moment the way it sometimes does. I heard 2 words distinctly, clear, and package. Calvin wrote for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, before the shove, he was looking past you toward the service corridor. Yes. And through his earpiece, you heard the words clear and package. Yes. Calvin nodded slowly. Not the nod of a man receiving new information. The nod of a man watching a map confirm what he had already begun to suspect. I am going to file for emergency release conditions tonight, he said. We will attach the hospital documentation, the surgical schedule, your role as Darius's medical contact. The court has accommodated medical emergencies in detention situations before. It does not always move quickly. How quickly is quickly enough? He met her eyes. I do not know yet, but I am going to find out. He stood and picked up his briefcase. He looked at the camera in the corner. at the red blinking light, the look of a man making a note about something he intended to address later. "Do not answer any more questions without me present," he said. "If they come back tonight, you say two things only. I am invoking my right to counsel. Please contact my attorney. Nothing else." Zazara looked up. "Calvin," he stopped. "My mother is alone in Houston." He held her gaze for a moment that contained more than the moment itself. He had known James Okafor. He had sat with James Okafor in 2006 in a situation that should never have become a situation. And he had understood then that certain families in this country carried more than their proportionate share of the weight that holding a life together required, and they carried it without acknowledgement and without pause, and they kept walking. "I know," he said. Then he left. And Zara sat with her hands flat on the table and looked at the camera's red blinking light and counted the minutes left before Darius's surgery in a way that had nothing to do with hope and everything to do with the specific discipline of a woman who had decided that the only thing she controlled right now was whether she stayed steady. So she stayed steady because it was the only useful thing available to her, and she was not a woman who wasted what was available. Jerome Aldridge did not sleep. He sat at his dining table in Decatur with two laptops open and a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago and a legal pad with a timeline written on it in the precise handwriting of a man who had learned that when systems failed you, the only thing you had left was your own documentation of what actually happened and when. He had raised his daughter in this apartment. She was 20 now, and at Spelman, and in the photograph on the wall across from him, she was standing in front of the campus library with her backpack on and her chin tilted in the way she had, ready for whatever came next. Jerome had taught her to trust systems that worked. He had built systems for 20 years. He believed in them the way people believed in structures they had tested repeatedly and found sound. He had handed over his phone believing the system would recognize what was on it. He understood now that had been the wrong thing to carry into that terminal. He opened his cloud storage. The video folder was empty. He checked the activity log. There it was. 5:51 p.m. Unauthorized access from an unrecognized device. File deletion at 5:54. Recovery folder cleared at 5:56. From the moment his phone was taken to the moment his cloud account was accessed. 4 minutes. Whoever had done it had gone directly to the right folder without browsing. They had known exactly what to look for and exactly where it would be. That kind of precision made Jerome angrier than carelessness would have. SAS was accident. This was architecture. He opened his secondary sync application. 3 years ago, after losing a significant work project to a hard drive failure, he had set up a secondary sync running on a 6-hour delay to a separate partition under a different account. Not sophisticated, not elegant, just a habit born from the understanding that important things needed redundancy. It ran on everything, including video files from the previous 24 hours. He navigated to the partition. There was a file name. The timestamp matched precisely. He clicked. The file was corrupted, not completely, partially. The corruption had cascaded from the primary deletion before the secondary sync could complete its transfer. He could not open the video as a playable file, but the metadata was intact. File name, timestamp, file size, large enough to be exactly what he knew it was. And then, in the cache layer underneath the sync attempt, he found the thumbnail, small, low resolution, generated automatically during the first seconds of the transfer before the corruption hit. He enlarged it, Briggs, his hands extended forward, Zara's shoulder, her weight already shifting downward to absorb the contact. The specific frozen geometry of a shove that the officer had later described as a defensive response to an attack. Jerome leaned back in his chair. His hands were not entirely steady. He recognized the feeling. It was the physical expression of understanding that something real had nearly been lost and had not been lost, and the margin between those two outcomes had been a 68-year-old woman in a gate area who had taken a video file without asking why and put it in her bag and zipped it closed. He called Calvin Reed's office at 11:08 p.m. Calvin. On the thumbnail, Jerome said. Briggs's hands making contact with her shoulder. The timestamp matches. File size matches the duration I recorded. The video itself is corrupted, but the metadata is intact. And I have the deletion log. Unauthorized access at 5:51 p.m., exactly 4 minutes after my phone was taken. Can you document your process? I have been screen recording everything since I got home. Timestamp narration. Every step good. Do not send anything from your primary accounts. I will have a secure upload link to you within the hour. Mr. Reed. Jerome looked at the thumbnail on his screen, at the small frozen proof of a thing that someone had tried very hard to make not exist. Whoever did this knew exactly which folder to access and then exactly how to clear the recovery trail. That is not a standard security response. That is someone who had already planned for the possibility of a recording. Yes, Calvin said, I know, which means Briggs did not make a call independently. Someone above him knew there might be footage and moved to eliminate it within minutes. Yes. Jerome was quiet for a moment. He looked at his daughter's photograph. The woman in the video, he said. Her brother. A pause that contained information. Surgery at 6 a.m. Jerome looked at the timestamp on his screen. 11:23 p.m. Then we do not have the luxury of being slow about this, he said. No, Calvin said, we do not. There is one more thing, Jerome said. The woman I sent the clip to, Bertha Coleman. She was sitting 3 seats from me in the gate area. I sent the full recording to her tablet via Bluetooth before they still has it. The complete video. Not corrupted. For exactly 3 scenes, Jerome. Yes, where is Mrs. Coleman now? I have her number. She gave it to me after security took my phone. She walked over, sat next to me, and said, young man, I have what you sent me, and I am going to need a number to call when I land. Jerome paused. She was flying to Birmingham. She landed at 7:40. Call her tonight, Calvin said. Tell her what we need. Tell her it is important, but tell her she is not obligated. This has to be her choice. She already made her choice, Jerome said, when she zipped her bag. Bertha Coleman answered her phone on the first ring. She had been awake. She said she had been awake since she landed because she had something on her tablet that she suspected needed to be somewhere safer than her tablet, and she had been waiting for someone to tell her where that somewhere was, Jerome explained. Bertha listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, What do you need me to do? Jerome walked her through a secure file transfer to a temporary encrypted server. Bertha followed every instruction precisely and without complaint, which Jerome later said was more than he could say for half the engineers he had worked with in 20 years. When transfer was confirmed, complete, Bertha said one more thing. She said, that young woman was trying to get to her brother, and they locked her in a room and turned her phone over so she couldn't answer the hospital calling. You make sure that matters to somebody. Jerome already did. Bertha said good. Then she said good night and hung up. Nadia Webb finished her shift at 2 a.m. She changed out of her uniform in the employee locker room, tied her shoes, put on her coat, walked to the parking structure on the south side, and sat in her car without starting the engine. She sat for 10 minutes. She thought about Roy Vance standing near the corridor entrance with his radio. She thought about the words she had heard. Phone secured, make sure it doesn't leak. She thought about the silver suitcase and the man in the dark jacket, and the 4 times in 9 months she had seen the same configuration in the same corridor, and had told herself it was not her business, and that keeping her job was a form of protecting her family, and that she did not know enough to be certain of what she was seeing. She knew enough now. She had known enough for several months. She had just been very carefully not finishing the knowing. She thought about Darius Okafor in a hospital bed in Houston. She did not know his name yet. She knew a young man with a heart condition was waiting for surgery, and his sister had been standing in a lane with legal paperwork trying to get on a plane to reach him, and had been shoved out of the lane and put in a gray room, and had her phone turned face down so she could not answer the hospital calling. She thought about her own son, Deshaun, 23 years old, night shift at a distribution warehouse, texting her "you good ma" the way he did when he sensed she was not telling him something. She took out her phone. She found the number she had looked up 6 hours earlier, Calvin Reed. Attorney at law, she dialed. He answered on the first ring, like the night had trained him to expect calls from numbers he did not recognize. This is Calvin Reed. Nadia looked at the parking structure ceiling. Concrete and pipes, and the ugly honest infrastructure that did not care about appearances. I work at the airport, she said. 11 years, cleaning staff. She stopped. Then she said the thing she had been circling since she heard Vance on his radio. I saw what happened in the priority lane today, and I saw what was happening while everyone was watching it happen. Silence, but not empty. The silence of a fan who was already organizing what she was telling him. "Can you meet me?" "Not at your office, where," she told him. He arrived before her. She had told him the parking lot behind Greater Hope Baptist on Campbellton Road. She had told him this because she had attended services at Greater Hope for 14 years, and she knew the lot had 3 exits and a security and chasuble system the congregation had installed after a theft in 2019, and a pastor who understood that sometimes the right thing and the safe thing required practical arrangements. Calvin was already there when she turned in. Gray sedan, headlights off, engine off, hands visible on the steering wheel, a man performing patience rather than merely waiting. Nadia watched him from the entrance to the lot for 8 minutes. He did not check his phone, did not look around in the way people looked around when they were checking for something. He just sat with his hands on the wheel and waited. She got out of her car. They stood at a distance at first. The night was cold, so sharp way November nights were cold in Atlanta when the temperature dropped for the assets in the city expected. Mrs. Webb, you came alone. I came alone. She looked at the road behind her. A car passed on Campbellton without slowing. "If anybody asks," she said, "we never met. If that's what you need. What I need is to not lose 11 years and a pension because a captain decided the airport belongs to him and whatever arrangements he has made inside it." She pulled her coat tighter. "Tell me about her first." The woman. Calvin told her. Zara, the medical authorization, the surgery, Darius, the gray door. The phone turned face down while Houston called. The charges that had been filed within the hour. Nadia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said she had counted and observed across Nas months without ever writing down. The priority lane was held empty for 14 minutes before she was approached. I timed it from when I first noticed to when that officer walked toward her. That is not operational. That is managed. Someone coordinated the passenger flow away from lane 4, starting at approximately 3:30 session. The officer who approached her and 2 others I have seen work with him before. Captain Vance was at the corridor entrance from around 3:40 onward. He was not there by coincidence. He was there because something was coming through. "The suitcase," Calvin said. Nadia looked at him carefully. "How do you know about a suitcase?" The woman in the lane heard something through the officer's earpiece. She heard the word package. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Silver handle, man, in a dark jacket." He went through the corridor without scanning. No stop, no checkpoint. Vance nodded him through. She looked at the church building. That was the 4th time in 9 months I have seen it. October, January, March, yesterday, the same man each time, same walk, different jackets. One of the previous suitcases was black, one's was dark green, yesterday was silver. After the woman was taken through the gray door, Calvin said, "Did you hear anything?" Nadia recited it the way she had been reciting it in her head for hours, without drama, with the precision of a woman who had trained herself to remember perfect things accurately because accuracy was the only protection available to people in her position. "I was near the corridor entrance, changing a liner near the employee access door." Vance was on his radio. He said, "Phone secured." Then a short pause. Then he said, "Make sure it doesn't leave." Calvin's pen stopped. He looked at her. He said, "Make sure it doesn't leave," he repeated. Yes. Someone had already told him there was a recording, and he was making sure it was handled before it could get out of the building. Calvin wrote. Nadia watched his hands move, the careful, deliberate motion of a man who understood that what she was telling him was going to have to hold up in a context much larger than a parking lot conversation. "There is a camera," she said. "Corridor 4, service access, labeled C17 on the maintenance grid. It covers the area where the suitcase went through." Calvin looked up. The footage from C17 would show the corridor traffic during the relevant window. It should. The camera has audio capability. Not perfect audio, but it catches radio traffic when officers close to the wall unit. Radio traffic like the order Briggs received. Possibly. Yes. Calvin was very still for a moment. Nadia reached into her coat pocket and unfolded a paper. She had printed it from the internal scheduling system on the locker room computer before she left the building. She held it out. "This is the maintenance schedule. Internal document. It shows the archive cycle for each corridor camera." She watched him take it, C-17 is scheduled for archive deletion at 4 a.m. It is on a standard 36-hour overwrite cycle. The standard cycle should keep it live until Wednesday evening. But the log shows a manual override entered today at 6:20 p.m., moving the deletion to 4 a.m. tonight. She looked at him. Someone changed the schedule after the incident, 6 hours after. Calvin looked at his watch, 4 a.m., less than 3 hours. Nadia, he said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that your answer will not change what I do with what you have already told me. She waited. Is there any way to access the C-17 archive before 4:00 a.m.? Nadia looked at the church, at the dark windows and across the entrance that was lit even at this hour, because the pastor believed in keeping a light on. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood exactly what was being asked and what answering it in either direction would cost. There is an auxiliary server room, she said. End of the service corridor behind B concourse. Technical systems support. The archive routes through there before the overwrite runs. She paused. I have a mechanical key for that corridor. From a pipe repair in 2021. It was never collected back from cleaning staff. Nobody tracks our equipment, returns the way they track other things. Nadia. Calvin's voice was quiet, not soft. The quiet of a man who respected the weight of what he was about to say. I cannot ask you to do anything that puts you at legal risk. I cannot advise it, and I cannot benefit from it if it creates liability for you. You understand what I am saying? I understand what you are not saying, she said. He looked at her. If anything feels wrong, he said. If anyone sees you where you should not be. If you feel unsafe for any reason, you leave. The footage is not worth your safety or your freedom. Nadia put her hands back in her pockets. Mr. Reed, she said, you do not get to decide what is worth what to me. That has always been somebody else's decision, and I am done with that. She walked back to her car. Calvin stood in the parking lot and looked at the maintenance schedule in his hand. At the time printed in the override column, 4:00 a.m. At the credentials Utsfield's Coaxtura code override entry, which showed an access code he did not yet have a name for, but intended to have a name for very soon. He called Jerome. Jerome was ready. He had his offline laptop set up, a clean USB drive, an external monitor, a written list of steps on paper because paper did not crash, and in situations like this, the thing most likely to fail was the thing you had trusted most. When Calvin called and explained what was about to happen, Jerome did not speak for 4 seconds. Then he said, I will walk her through it. She has never done anything like this before. I know. I walked my mother through setting up a new phone for 3 hours on a Sunday. I can do this. I got his earpiece and his secondary laptop, and he set up in his kitchen with a glass of water, and the quiet focus of a man returning to the thing he was actually built for. Not the politics of the evening, not the airports and the officials, and the people who deleted files and called it security. Just the work. The clean, honest work of a man who understood systems well enough to navigate them even when someone had tried to break them. Nadia called him at 1:41 a.m. from outside the employee entrance. I'm going back in, she said. I'm here, Jerome said. Tell me when you're moving. Nadia had left her actual phone in her locker 6 hours earlier. This was not strategy. This was genuinely accidental. She had switched to her personal phone at the end of her shift and left the work phone behind. But when she walked back through the employee entrance at 1:44 a.m., and the overnight guard looked up, and she said, I left my phone in my locker. The guard nodded and waved her through, because people left things in lockers, and it happened. There was nothing unusual about a cleaning staff employee returning for a forgotten item. She retrieved the work phone. Then she pushed her cart down the B concourse service corridor. The cart was not performance. The cart was what she had. It was also the most effective form of cover available in this building, because 11 years had confirmed what she had suspected from her first month. Nobody questioned a woman with a cleaning cart. She was the background. She was the infrastructure. She had made herself unremarkable in this building so thoroughly and for so long that it had become indistinguishable from actual invisibility, which it was not. She was choosing it, every day, every shift. It was a performance she had been giving for 11 years, and she was very good at it. She passed Corridor Junction 3, then 4, turned left at the Mechanical Systems Access hallway. The hallway was empty in the way of spaces that expected to remain empty all night. She put the earpiece in. "Jerome," she said quietly. "I'm here," he said. "Take your time. There's no rush." She stopped at the door marked Mechanical System Support. She looked in both directions. Empty. She put the key in the lock. It turned. "I'm in," she said. "Okay." Jerome's voice was steady, professional. This was his language. This was where he was comfortable. "Look for the maintenance workstation. Corner of the room. Older monitor, gray casing, probably. Keyboard in front of it." She found it. The room was cold and loud with the hum of server fans stacked in rows along the back wall. Green and amber blinking in the specific patient rhythm of systems that ran continuously because they were not designed to stop. Found it. Good. Insert the USB first. Then wake the monitor. She inserted the drive, touched the keyboard. The screen came up blue. A login page with a service access shortcut in the bottom left corner. A small wrench icon. I see a log scanning screen. There's a small icon in the bottom left. Looks like a wrench. Click it. That should open a maintenance dashboard without requiring full credentials. These systems have technician override access built in for live maintenance windows. She clicked. The dashboard opened. "I'm in," she said. "Good. Look for a tab that says archive or corridor feed or camera management. I might be labeled any of those." She found it. Navigated through 2 sub-menus with Jerome talking her through each step. Not rushed, not tense. The voice of a man who understood that precision mattered more than speed, that the woman on the other end of the line was doing it difficult in cold room at 2 in the morning, but because she had decided the truth was worth more than the safety of not knowing it. Camera C17 date, time range, 3:30 of 5 to 5. I have it, she said. Select the highest resolution export available. Confirms the USB as the destination. Then hit export and tell me what the progress bar does. She selected, confirmed, clicked export. The progress bar appeared, 0%. She watched it. The room hummed around her. The server fans ran in their steady, layered frequencies. She stood in front of the monitor with her hands at her sides, and she watched the bar move. 11%, 23%. Outside in the corridor, a cart moved past the door, wheels on tile. Specific sound of cleaning equipment being pushed at the pace she knew from the inside. She went absolutely still. The sound continued without slowing. Moved away, 41%. Jerome talked to her while it ran, not about the footage, about the export verification process he would run when he received it, about the metadata markers that would authenticate the timestamp, about the chain of custody steps Calvin would need. He talked to keep her in the room in the way that mattered, present, focused, not in the part of her mind that was calculating what happened if one opened that door. 63%. Then voices in the corridor, 2 men. Getting closer. Archive runs at 4. We check the override, took at 3:30. The other voice, how many cameras? C17, C22, West Service, everything tagged from yesterday afternoon. Nadia looked at the door. She did not move. 78%. "Jerome," she said, so quietly it was barely sound. "I heard," he said. "Stay still, watch the bar." The footsteps stopped near the door, 89%. One of the men said something she could not make out. The other laughed, a short sound, the laugh of men who were not worried about anything in particular. 94%. The footsteps started moving again, away from the door, toward the junction, getting quieter. 98, 99, complete. Nadia ejected it, that's the way Jerome had told to eject it, properly, all the way through the protocol, because he had told her that a corrupted file helped no one, and she had believed him because he was right. She put the drive in her coat pocket, logged out of the workstation, wiped the keyboard with the cloth from her cart pocket, because she always carried one, and because she was a woman who cleaned things, and it felt correct to leave no trace of herself in a room she had not been authorized to be in. Then she walked out of the mechanical systems room at exactly the pace she always walked. She was out of the corridor by 2:47 a.m. The archive deletion was scheduled for 4 a.m. She had an hour and 13 minutes to spare. She called Calvin from her car. "I have it," she said, Silas. "1 second. Just one. Are you safe? I'm in my car outside the building. Did anyone see you in the room?" "No," he exhaled. The measured release of a man who had been holding something carefully for several hours and could now set it down. "Nadia." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Make sure it's what we need. I will. I need you to bring it to greater hope. Jerome is going to authenticate it before it goes anywhere else." She drove to the church. Calvin was already in the parking lot. Jerome was on a video call on Calvin's laptop set up on the hood of the sedan. He had an offline machine, 2 external drives, and the particular focused energy of a man who had been awake for 20 hours and was running entirely on the knowledge that what he was doing mattered. Nadia handed Calvin the USB. He put on gloves before he touched it. She noticed. She did not say anything, but she noticed, and she was glad he was the kind of man who did the right procedural thing without being asked to. He took it inside to the fellowship hall. Jerome authenticated the file while Calvin documented the chain of custody. Hash verification, timestamp confirmation. Export metadata cross-referenced against the maintenance schedule Nadia had printed. Then Jerome opened the footage. The service corridor appeared on the screen, fluorescent lights. The timestamp in the lower right corner reading 3:39 p. Mem Briggs near the corridor entrance. Hand at his earpiece, eyes toward the priority lane entrance. Waiting, not patrolling, not responding. Waiting for something specific to happen so he could do something specific in response. Then the audio. Jerome had told them the audio quality would be imperfect. He had been wrong in the better direction. The camera unit near the corridor wall had picked up the radio frequency clearly enough. Not perfect, but clear. A voice through brick red radio Vance. Clear the lane. Package is moving. And then 5 seconds before that, a different voice. Shorter. Quieter. The voice of a man who spoke in the register of someone who gave directions rather than received them. Last run this month. Keep it quiet. At 41 p. on the a man in a dark jacket walked through the service corridor with a silver-handled suitcase. No stops, no scans, no checkpoint. Vance at the corridor entrance, turning fractionally toward the man, giving a single nod. Jerome paused the footage. Nobody in the fellowship hall spoke for a moment. Then Nadia said quietly, "That is what I saw." Calvin looked at the frozen frame, at the man with the suitcase, at Vance's turned shoulder, at the timestamp. The second voice, he said to Jerome.
Can you identify it?
Not tonight. I need more time and better equipment for voice analysis. But the recording is clean enough. Jerome looked at the screen. This is strong, Mr. Reed. The corridor footage, the radio audio, the timestamp, the chain of custody from Nadia to you. Combined with my deletion log and the full video Bertha Coleman is holding in Birmingham, it is going to be very hard to dismiss. Hard is not impossible, Calvin said. No, Jerome said. But hard is where we start. Calvin looked at the maintenance schedule. At the override entry, timestamped 6:20 p.m. at the credentials field. He made a decision. He picked up his phone and dialed the number he had looked up 2 hours earlier. The federal duty attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. The phone rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, cautious. The way of people whose rang at 3 in the morning and who had learned not to assume the call was a mistake. Calvin identified himself. He said he had evidence of a coordinated obstruction of justice in a federal security facility involving the destruction of digital evidence, the corruption of cloud storage, and the manipulation of security camera archive schedules. He said he had documentary proof of a pattern of unauthorized transport through a federal security checkpoint, spanning at minimum 9 months. He said he needed the evidence formally received and protected before a scheduled archive deletion ran at 4:00 a.m. The duty attorney was quiet for approximately 8 seconds. Then she said she would need the documentation sent to a secure federal address within the hour, and that she would have a preservation order in place before sunrise. Calvin said that would work. He looked at Jerome. Jerome was already typing. Outside, in the park lot Great Hope Baptist Church on John Campbellton Road, a woman who had cleaned the floors of Hartsfield-Jackson for 11 years sat in her car with the engine running and the heat on and both hands in her lap. She was looking at the church entrance, at the light above the door that stayed on all night because somebody had decided a long time ago that there should always be a light on. Her phone buzzed. "Deshawn, you good, Ma?" She looked at the message. Then she typed back. "Better than I was. Get some sleeps." She sat for another minute. Then she drove home through streets that were empty in the specific quiet of a city that was between one day and the next. Past closed businesses and lit gas stations, and the occasional car moving through intersections, without stopping at the light. Because at 3:15 in the morning, the light was a suggestion for a city that was not quite awake yet. She thought about the woman in the navy coat. She thought about the gray door closing. She thought about 11 years of walking past things she understood and choosing to keep walking. because keeping walking had felt like the practical choice, the safe choice, the choice that protected what she had built. She thought about how many times she had made that choice. She thought about the archive deletion scheduled for 4A. That was not going to happen now. She thought about what it felt like to make a different choice. She drove home. She took off her shoes at the door the way she always did. She did not turn on the television. She stood in her kitchen and drank a glass of water in the quiet of a house where she had raised 2 sons and buried a husband and built 11 years of careful, ordinary life. And she understood that something had changed tonight in a way that was not reversible, and that she had been the one to change it, and that this was on balance, the right thing. Then she went to bed, and in Atlanta at 4 a.m. The archive deletion routine ran at Hart-Jackson and found that the footage it had been scheduled to erase had already been copied, authenticated, documented, and received by a federal duty attorney who had issued a preservation order 47 minutes earlier. The deletion ran. There was nothing left to delete. The truth had already left the building. The courthouse on Pryor Street looked different at 7 in the morning. Not smaller, just older, the way buildings looked when you arrived before the crowd did. The stone was guarded from overnight rain. The flag above the entrance hung still. A janitor worked a mop across the lower steps in long, unhurried strokes, moving with the patience of someone who knew the steps would get wet again and understood that was not a reason to stop. Calvin Reed arrived at 7:11 a.m. with a briefcase, 3 external drives, a printed chain of custody document, and the name of the federal duty attorney he had spoken to at 3 a.m. written on a notacard in his breast pocket. Because he was not too proud to know what 20 hours without sleep did to memory, he went inside. Zazra had not slept. She had used the hours the way she used slow periods in the hospital, reviewing what she knew, organizing it, making fear into information because information could be worked with. At 7:38 then, Kevin came in with 2 cups of vending machine coffee. He set one in front of her. She picked it up without ceremony. They had moved past formalities at midnight when Zara had asked him directly what the realistic probability of dismissal was, and he had given her a number and a condition, and she had said okay, and that had settled what this was. 2 people, same problem, different angles. The surgery started at 6, Calvin said, and Eleanor called at 6:44. Stable on bypass. The team said the valve was in worse condition than the imaging showed, but they believe they can complete the repair. She pressed her thumb against the bridge of her nose, held it. Okay, she said. Okay. He told her everything. Jerome's thumbnail from the corrupted secondary sink. The deletion log showing unauthorized access at 5:51 p, 4 minutes after a phone was taken. The full uncompromised video Bertha Coleman had carried in her bag, Genite B11 to Birmingham, and transferred to their secure server at 11 the previous night. Nadia, the church parking lot, the mechanical key. The C-17 footage, the 2 voices in the audio, the federal duty attorney who had issued a preservation order at 3:13 a.m. When he finished, Zara was quiet. Bertha Coleman, she said, 68 years old. She held the file through her flight, transferred it from home, and went to bed. Calvin paused. When I called to thank her, she said she had a granddaughter's recital to get back to. Zara looked at her hands on the table. She didn't know any of us, she said. No, she just held it. Yes. Zara sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "That's the section voice in the audio. Not Vance, different register, shorter." Calvin looked at his notes. Last run this month, keep it quiet ads. That is not someone being informed of an operation. That is someone deciding when it runs and when it stops. From above, Vance. 3 levels above, Gary Hollis, Superintendent of Regional Aviation Security. He oversees this airport and 5 others. The architecture, the timing, the decision that yesterday was the last run that came from him. There were other people before me, Zara said, in that lane. Almost certainly. People who moved when they were told to, yes. She looked at the window. She had not moved because she had 63 minutes and a flight and a brother and a lane she had legal documentation to stand in. Every box checked, exactly where she was supposed to be. She had not yet understood that none of that was relevant to why Briggs was walking toward her. That was not heroism. That was geometry. Calvin set 3 color-coded folders on the table. Chain of custody, deletion logs, Nadia's signed statement. Zazara looked at the yellow folder. She signed it, with her name and her 11 years of service. She could lose everything she built there. She understands that. She told me before I could tell her. Zara pressed her hand briefly over the folder, then pulled it back. Let's go, she said. The courtroom filled with people who had come for different reasons. Some believed what they had seen on the news. Some did not. Some came because in certain communities, when a black woman was brought into a room like this one under circumstances like these, people understood that their presence was itself a statement. That being watched changed what a room was willing to do. They came in careful clothes. Older women with good posture sat near the center aisle with their hands on their purses. A man who had taken a morning off from a job that did not easily give mornings. 3 women from a community organization who had made calls at 6 a.m. and received enough callbacks to 2 rows. They did not make noise. They did not need to. Zara walked in at 8:56 a.m. wearing the same dark slacks and cream blouse she had been wearing when the gray door closed behind her. She had made a decision about her posture consciously and with full awareness of what it communicated. She was going to walk in looking like what she was. Briggs entered in his wheelchair, neck brace, folded blanket. Vance came through the sit-side door in a dark suit and sat 2 rows behind the prosecution table with his ankle crossed and the expression of a man who believed the morning was proceeding according to plan. He looked at Zara once. She looked back. He looked away first. Judge Harold Whitmore took the bench at 9. Narrow face, reading glasses on a chain, the expression of a man immune to courthouse theater. He granted the emergency release motion in 4 sentences. Her brother was in surgery. That was not flight motivation. That was family. Conditional release granted. Vance uncrossed his arms. Zara let out a breath no one heard. The prosecution's experts said what they had been retained to say. Trained combat technique. Targeted. Disproportionate. The word lethal entered the room and stayed there. Calvin crossed both of them. He asked the biomechanics consultant whether his materials had shown Briggs making physical contact first. They had not. He asked the defensive tactics instructor whether Zara had advanced toward Briggs after he fell. She had not. Whether she had raised her hands. She had. Whether raising open hands while standing still was the behavior of a person intending to continue an assault. Not typically, Lang said. Not typically, Calvin repeated, and sat down. At 10:51 a.m., Calvin played the C-17 footage. He introduced the chain of custody documentation first. Read it aloud. Every step from Nadia Webb, inserting the USB drive to the file arriving in federal preservation at 3:13 a.m. He read it in the deliberate, clear language of a man who understood that chain of custody was not a formality. It was the thing that made evidence mean something rather than merely exist. The service corridor appeared on the courtroom screen. Timestamp, 3:39 p.m. Briggs near the corridor entrance. Hand at his earpiece. Eyes toward the priority lane, not patrolling, waiting. At 3:41, a man in a dark jacket walked through with a silver suitcase. No stop, no scan. Vance at the corridor entrance gave a single downward nod. The man continued through without breaking stride. Then the audio. Vance through the radio. Clear the lane. Package is moving. And 5 seconds before that, a different voice, shorter. The voice of someone for whom giving instructions was simply the normal mode of operation. Last run this month. Keep it quiet. The room did not react immediately. There was a delay of about 3 seconds, as if the information needed time to travel from where it was heard to wherever understanding actually lived. Zafra watched Vance, completely still. The stillness of a man whose mind was moving very fast in a direction he could not let his face show. Then Briggs turned his head. Just slightly. Just enough. He looked back at Vance. The courtroom saw it. Moss, at the prosecution table, went still in the way of a woman rapidly updating her understanding of the situation she was standing in. Briggs's attorney leaned toward him, then stood. Your Honor. The defense requests a brief recess. 20 minutes, Whitmore said. They needed 11. Briggs came out of the conference room without the wheelchair. He walked under his own power, and he walked like a man who had spent the morning performing something the morning had already invalidated. Moss stopped in front of Calvin. She looked at Zara first, the look of a woman who had built a case on a set of facts and had watched those facts reorganize into a different shape. Officer Briggs has provided a voluntary statement, she said. He has confirmed the corridor arrangement. 9 instances over 14 months. He has confirmed that the order to clear the priority lane came through Vance via private radio. His confirmed the instructions was connected to the transit of an unscanned package through the service corridor. And the second voice, Calvin said, consistent with a voice he heard once when Vance was on an open call. He can't make a formal identification. He can testify to the consistency. The charges against Dr. Okafor. Moss looked at Za. Full dismissal with prejudice. Motion filed before noon. She paused. I am also formally referring this matter to the federal duty attorney for the Northern District. She has been in contact since 3 this morning, Calvin said. Something moved across Moss's face. The acknowledgement of a person who had just understood that the other sideable had been working while she was sleeping. She turned to Zara. I am sorry for what you went through, she said. Zara looked at her. Make sure the investigation is thorough, she does. Not just yesterday. Everything. Because I was not the first person they moved out of that lane. Moss held her gaze. I know, she said. We are looking into it. The flight to Houston took 2 hours and 9 minutes. Her phone buzzed at 1:41 p. Eleanor, he's out. Recovery. Surgeon said it went well. Valve looks good. He asked the nurse if you were still being bossy when he came around. I told him yes. Zara put the phone face down and looked out the window and let herself cry in the quiet way she had been not crying for 23 hours. Not because it was over, because Darius was out of surgery, and she was on a plane going to him instead of sitting in a cold room watching his hospital's name light up on a phones. Someone kept turning face down. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She typed back, tell him yes, and tell him I'm almost there. Eleanor was in the hallway outside recovery when Zara stepped off the elevator, blue cardigan, cold coffee in her hand. The look of a woman who had stopped pretending 3 days in a hospital had not cost her something. When she saw Zara, she put the cup on the windowsill. They did not speak first. Eleanor held out her arms, and Zara walked into them, and Eleanor held her with the force of a woman who had spent 23 hours not knowing if she would be able to do this. You're here, Eleanor said. I'm here, Zara said. Darius was awake. Paler than she had seen him in 2 years, his hand still on the blanket for once. Zara read the monitors before she let herself look at his face. Oxygen saturation good, heart rhythm regular and strong in the new way that replaced the compromised old way. The numbers were where they needed to be. Then she looked at his face. He focused on her slowly. Then he said, in a voice rough from the intubation tube, you look terrible. Zara pulled the chair close. You're on pain medication, she said. Your opinions are suspended. My opinions are constitutional. He shifted, winced, stopped. Mom said you got arrested. I was detained. She said you beat someone up. Responded to a physical threat using controlled and proportionate techniques. Darius stared at her. Then the ship a smile moved across his face. Not fully formed. The machinery warming back up from somewhere cold. Dad always said Calvin was good, he said. He was. Eleanor came in and sat on the other side of the bed, and they did not say anything for a while. 3 people, a hospital room, a Thursday afternoon, the monitor beeping in its steady, reliable rhythm. Just that. Just the fact of all of them still being in the same room. 5 minutes later on a Thursday morning in early April, Zara walked through Hartsfield-Jackson, Darius beside her, slightly slower on his left side. Also talking more than he had talked in months, spending energy he had spent 2 years, pretending not to be losing. Currently spending it on opinions about airport coffee. Eleanor behind them, carrying more luggage than either of her children had agreed to let her carry, pretending she was not watching every step Darius took. They passed the priority lane. Zara's pace did not change. She did not look at the floor where the authorization form had landed. She did not slow. She walked through it at the same pace she walked through everything else, because that was the only statement she wanted to make. It was just a lane she had every right to stand in, which had always been the entire point. Near gate B11, Darius stopped. Nadia Webb was crossing the terminal with a cup of coffee, civilian clothes, gray jacket, dark jean. Without the uniform, she looked like any of the thousands of other people moving through on a Thursday morning in April. She saw Zara. They both stopped. The terminal continued. An announcement about Charlotte. A child explaining something loudly, rolling luggage rattling over a floor seam. Zara held Naz's gaze. Then she nodded once. Nadia nodded back. Nothing else, nothing legible to anyone else in that terminal. Between the two of them, it was complete. Darius looked at his sister. You know her? Yes. Did she help? Zara watched until Nadia was part of the crowd and then part of the terminal and then just the terminal. She saw what was happening, Zara said, and she didn't look the other way. Darius was quiet with that in the way he was quiet with things worth being quiet about. "That's hard it sounds," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is. Eleanor arrived with the luggage cart. I don't know what the two of you are doing, but we have a flight." Darius started walking. Zara looked at the priority lane one more time. At the people moving through it with their documentation and their reasons and their quiet urgencies Nathan else could see. All of them going somewhere, all of them with something waiting on the other side. She turned and followed her family toward the gate. Coach Ease texted that evening from the hotel porch in Savannah, sweet tea going warm beside her. Darius asleep inside. Eleanor laughing on the phone and in the bedroom. The live oaks along the street holding the April light in the Spanish moss, goldens and slower than light had any right to be. You good. Zara looked at the oaks. She thought about the cold room. The phone turned face down. Bertha Colesman zipping her bag in a gate area without asking to explain why. Jerome at his table at 2 in the morning because a thumbnail was not nothing. Nadia, walking out of a server room at exactly the same pace she always walked, because changing her pace would have told the building something she was not willing to tell it. Calvin with his note card and his 3 folders, and the name written in his breast pocket, because he was not too proud to know what his exhaustion did to memory, about what it had cost each of them, about what it would have cost not to. She typed back, "Yeah, we're good." She set the phone down. She picked up the sweet tea. The evening moved through the moss and the street went quiet in the way old streets went quiet when the day had finished asking things of the people in them. The truth had not arrived on time, but it had arrived, because the people who knew it refused to let it disappear, and in the end that was the only way it ever did.